I was coming back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I saw our neighbor Abigail standing by her garden. Abigail was a nondescript woman as far as I knew. She never had a husband or children. She greeted me sweetly, and I smiled back. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Illinois, in the private sector. My parents had sold me this house when I married Shelley and moved to Iowa. As I walked up to our house, I noticed the familiar sights and sounds of our street. Kids were playing, birds were chirping, and the smell of freshly cut grass filled the air. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and it felt safe and predictable. Shelley had always been ambitious, and when she decided she wanted to become a model, I, Henry, did everything I could to support her. I work as a freelance graphic designer from home, which gave me the flexibility to help her build her portfolio and find the right photographer. That's how we met Donald. He seemed professional, his work was impressive, and Shelley was excited to start this new chapter. Shelley's shoots became more frequent, and she often came home late. She said Donald had a great eye for sunset shots, which meant they needed to work during the evening hours. It all seemed plausible, and I was busy with my own projects, so I didn't think much of it. One evening, Shelley rushed out for a shoot, leaving some of her things behind. Around 7 p.m., I noticed her phone and wallet on the kitchen counter. Knowing how disorganized she could be when she was in a hurry, I decided to take them to her at Donald's studio. The studio was only a few blocks away, and I arrived around 7:30 p.m. The place was dimly lit, and faint sounds came from the back room. I walked quietly, intending to leave her things on a table and get back home. But then I heard Shelley's voice, a mix of laughter and something else, something intimate. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved towards the source of the noise. Peeking through a partially open door, my heart sank. There they were, naked on the bed. Shelley was straddling Donald, her head thrown back as he skillfully fidgeted with his fingers in her intimate area. They were completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to my presence. Knowing that barging in and confronting them wouldn't accomplish anything, I quietly left the studio and went back home. Once home, I went through the motions of finishing my project but couldn't focus. When Shelley came home around 10 p.m., she acted as if nothing had happened. She talked about how great the shoot went and how talented Donald was. I waited until she finished, then told her I had seen everything. Shelley didn't look surprised. She said it was good that I finally found out about everything. She mentioned that she had lost interest in our marriage and that Donald made her happy. She had already prepared the divorce documents and handed them to me. Taking the folder, I realized there was no going back. Shelley packed some of her things and left without another word. Left alone in the house, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the divorce papers. The next few days were spent adjusting to the new reality. I tried to keep busy with work, but reminders of Shelley were everywhere. I called up my buddy Mike, who had known both Shelley and me for years, hoping for some insight. Mike mentioned that Shelley had seemed distant the last few times they hung out. He thought she was busy with her modeling, but admitted there were times when she seemed distracted. When I got home, there was a message from Shelley. She wanted to come by to pick up the rest of her things. I agreed, knowing it was a step towards closure. When she arrived, she packed quickly and efficiently, all business. She apologized, saying this was the right thing for both of us. I watched her drive away, feeling a strange mix of relief. It was finally over. That night, I read through each page of the divorce papers carefully before signing. It felt like signing away a part of my life, but it was the only way forward. As the days turned into weeks, I adjusted to the new reality. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and started going to the gym again. One evening, I found an old journal Shelley had kept. Flipping through the pages, most entries were mundane until I found one from a few months ago. Shelley wrote about a shoot with Donald, saying he made her feel beautiful and alive. The next day, I went to the courthouse to file the divorce papers. Handing them over felt like a final act of closure. Soon I decided to visit Donald's studio to confront him and get some answers. Before I could leave, though, there was a knock on the door. It was Abigail, our neighbor. She expressed her sympathy for what happened, apologizing for not coming over earlier. I invited her in for tea, and as we talked, I sensed that she was not indifferent to me. Her mannerisms and the way she looked at me gave it away, but I didn't show any sign of noticing. I told her I had to go and she left, seemingly disappointed but understanding. I headed to Donald's studio, determined to find out more about this man who had upended my life. As I entered the studio, I saw another girl getting dressed. Donald kissed her on the lips as she left, whispering something to her that made her giggle. It struck me how he had already moved on to another woman so quickly. I cleared my throat to get his attention. Donald turned, and to my surprise, he was quite calm and composed. He didn't try to push me away or avoid the confrontation. Instead, he invited me to sit down. He started talking before I could say anything, explaining that he never took Shelley seriously, and that she was the one who pursued him. According to him, if she was already prepared with divorce papers, she was going to leave me anyway, and he just happened to be the catalyst. Admiring his calm demeanor, I asked to see the photos he had taken of Shelley. He opened his computer and started showing me her portfolio. The photos were good, capturing her beauty and grace. Then suddenly, Donald received a call from a courier who couldn't find his studio. He had to step out to meet the courier, leaving me alone with his computer. I decided to browse through the gallery, curious to see more of his work. There were photos of many women, but then I stumbled upon a folder that stood out. It contained over 300 photos of Shelley, completely naked and in various intimate poses. Some of the photos even included other men, though their faces were not visible. Shelley's face, however, was clear and expressive in every shot. When Donald returned, I asked him about the photos. He seemed slightly defensive but maintained his composure. "She asked for them," he said. "It was her idea, not mine. She wanted to feel liberated, I guess." "And the men?" I pressed. "She wanted them in the frame. It was all her doing," he replied nonchalantly. "Look, I'm a photographer. I don't judge. I just capture what my subjects want." I told him I didn't care about his excuses. The only thing I wanted was all those photos sent to me and he would never see me again. Surprisingly, he agreed without much fuss. Within minutes, he transferred the entire collection to my phone. After returning home from Donald's studio with the collection of Shelley's photos, I attempted to focus on finishing a design project. Immersing myself in work was a welcome distraction, albeit a temporary one. The task involved creating a brand identity for a new client, and I buried myself in typography and color schemes. As I finalized the logo design, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike, my longtime friend. We agreed to meet at a local bar that evening. Upon arriving, I found Mike already seated, nursing a beer. He greeted me with a concerned look, sensing something was off. Over drinks, I narrated the events of the past few days, from discovering Shelley's affair to the divorce papers. When I showed him the photos, his eyes widened in disbelief. "I knew something was up, but I never thought she'd go this far," he muttered. Mike's shock turned into a surprising suggestion. "Why not create an OnlyFans account and post these photos there? She's an adult, and judging by these pictures, she looks genuinely happy. It's unlikely Donald forced her into this. Besides, it's legal since she willingly posed for them." I mulled over the idea. It was unconventional, but it offered a sense of retribution. With Mike's encouragement, we devised a plan. Back home, I spent hours setting up the account. Naming it Shelley's Secrets, I uploaded the photos, ensuring the explicit ones were blurred initially to attract curiosity and subscribers. At first, there was no activity, and I wondered if it was a mistake. Days passed, and I kept busy with more design projects. Then notifications began trickling in. Subscribers were joining, comments were pouring in, and the account was gaining traction. The engagement was a mix of admiration for Shelley's beauty and curiosity about her story. The initial trickle turned into a flood as the account went viral within niche communities. The monetary aspect was surprising. Tips and requests for more content came in, and the revenue from the account started to grow. It felt surreal, turning something so painful into a source of income. Despite the ethical gray area, it provided a strange sense of empowerment and control over a situation that had rendered me helpless. One evening, while checking the account statistics, a message popped up. It was from Shelley. She had discovered the account and was livid. Her message was a mix of rage and threats of legal action. I expected this, but I felt oddly calm. I replied, pointing out that she had posed willingly and that the photos were hers to begin with. Legally, she had little ground to stand on. Her response was silence, and it stayed that way for weeks. The account continued to grow, and so did my detachment from the whole ordeal. I was moving on, finding solace in the support of friends and the distraction of work. Mike and I met again to discuss the unexpected success of the account. We marveled at how quickly it had taken off and speculated on Shelley's reaction. Maybe this was the wake-up call she needed, Mike suggested. In the following months, life took on a new rhythm. I focused on expanding my freelance business, reconnecting with old friends, and exploring new hobbies. The OnlyFans account, though initially a form of retaliation, became a symbol of reclaiming my narrative. Shelley's messages stopped altogether, and she seemed to have accepted the new reality. Occasionally, I'd hear about her through mutual acquaintances, but I no longer felt the sting of betrayal. Instead, there was a strange sense of closure. One day, while sorting through some old boxes, I stumbled upon our wedding photos. Flipping through them, I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with acceptance. The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. Abigail began to come over more frequently after Shelley moved out. It was subtle at first, a quick hello when she was gardening or a wave from her porch. Over time, her visits became more regular. She'd drop by with a pie or just to chat about her day. There was something endearing about her shyness and the way she blushed when our hands accidentally touched. Despite her plain appearance, she had a charm that was hard to ignore. One afternoon, I decided to visit her. I walked over to her house and knocked on the door. Abigail came out, surprised but happy to see me. Without overthinking, I invited her on a date. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and then she broke into a bright smile. She agreed and told me to wait while she got ready. I waited on her porch, my heart pounding with anticipation. When she finally stepped out, I was stunned. She wore a beautiful red dress that hugged her curves perfectly, and her makeup was bold yet tasteful. She looked stunning, a far cry from her usual reserved self. "Wow, Abigail, I've never seen you like this," I said, unable to hide my amazement. She smiled shyly and took my hand. "Well, I never had a reason to dress up before," she replied. We headed towards my car, ready to drive to the center of town for our date. Just as we reached the car, a voice called out from behind us, "Are you two together now?" I turned to see Shelley standing there, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen her. "Yes, we are," I said, not wanting to hide anything. Shelley approached us, her face a mixture of anger and desperation. "Because of your stupid OnlyFans stunt, some fans found my personal phone number and are now sending me messages. They even sent me a gift by mail, somehow finding out my address. And to top it all off, Donald dumped me when he started dating someone else. Now I'm stuck in a rented apartment and planning to leave for Iowa." I felt a pang of guilt but stood firm. "I'm sorry, Shelley, but I can't help you with that." With that, I opened the car door for Abigail and we drove off, leaving Shelley behind. We arrived at a charming restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the ambiance was as rich as the food. Abigail and I were seated at a cozy table near the window, the perfect spot for our first date. We were just starting to relax and enjoy our meal when I noticed a familiar face across the room. It was one of the guys who had been particularly active on Shelley's OnlyFans page, a fact I knew from the constant notifications. He spotted me and made his way over, a sly grin on his face. "Hey man, you're the guy who posted those pictures of Shelley, right? Just wanted to say thanks, those were some quality uploads." Abigail's eyes widened in shock, and I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. "Look, this is neither the time nor the place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The guy shrugged, seemingly unfazed. "Just thought I'd say hi. By the way, you've got quite the ex-wife. She's been getting a lot of attention lately." I managed to keep my composure until he walked away. Abigail looked at me, her eyes full of questions. "I'm sorry about that," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I never expected it to affect things like this." Abigail squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's okay, Henry. I understand you've been through a lot. Let's just enjoy our evening." Despite the unexpected interruption, the rest of the date went smoothly. We laughed, shared stories, and got to know each other better. By the end of the night, I realized that there was something special about Abigail, something that made me feel hopeful about the future. As we drove back to our neighborhood, I glanced over at Abigail and smiled. She looked back at me, her eyes shining with happiness. "I had a great time tonight," she said softly. "Me too," I replied, feeling a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in a long time. We pulled up to her house and I walked her to the door. "Would you like to do this again sometime?" I asked. Abigail nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I'd love that." After my date with Abigail, life began to feel more normal. However, I continued posting Shelley's photos on OnlyFans 2 per day. The account's popularity soared, and the comments and interactions kept pouring in. The next photo in the queue was particularly provocative. Shelley on all fours, wearing a collar with a chain held by an unseen man behind her. I knew it would stir the pot even more. I posted the photo in the morning, and within minutes, the account exploded with activity. Comments ranged from admiration for Shelley's daring poses to questions about her identity and personal life. As the hour passed, the number of likes and messages skyrocketed, the notifications buzzing incessantly on my phone. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Shelley. She was in tears, begging me to stop posting the photos. She said the messages were getting worse, especially after the last photo. People were calling her constantly, and now they were sending things to her apartment. Her voice was shaky, almost drowned out by her sobs. I listened silently, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with pity. Shelley had chosen this path, and now she had to deal with the consequences. Despite her pleas, I told her that I wasn't stopping. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I hung up, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. It was clear that the public exposure was hitting her hard, much harder than I anticipated. That evening, while working on another design project, I received a notification from the OnlyFans account. Someone had sent a message claiming to know Shelley's new address and threatening to visit her. I knew I couldn't ignore this, so I saved the message as evidence. The situation was escalating, and I had to be cautious. The next day, I had coffee with Mike and told him about the latest developments. He was both shocked and amused, but he warned me to be careful. "This could get out of hand," he said. Despite the chaos, I couldn't deny the thrill of seeing Shelley suffer the consequences of her betrayal. It felt like justice, albeit a twisted form of it. That evening, I posted another photo. This time, it was one of Shelley posing seductively on a bed, her eyes locked onto the camera with a mischievous glint. The reaction was instant, with subscribers flooding the account with comments and messages. The activity was relentless, and I couldn't help but check the account frequently, watching the numbers climb. Around midnight, Shelley called again. This time she sounded desperate. She told me that someone had come to her apartment and left a note saying they knew where she lived. She was genuinely afraid and begged me to stop posting new photos. I felt a twinge of pity but pushed it aside. I told her I would stop posting new photos, but that the ones already up would stay. She thanked me profusely, her relief palpable even through the phone. The next day, I checked the OnlyFans account one last time. The latest photo had garnered the highest engagement yet, with subscribers clamoring for more. But I knew it was time to put an end to this chapter. I posted a final message to the subscribers, announcing that there would be no more new content. The reactions were mixed, with some expressing disappointment and others understanding the decision. One day, while walking down the street, I ran into Donald. He seemed a bit tense, and after some small talk, he brought up Shelley. He mentioned that since I stopped posting photos, one very disappointed subscriber had started making threats, and these had escalated to a dangerous level. Donald suggested that something needed to be done and advised contacting the police. I shrugged and told him that if Shelley wanted to contact the police, she should do it herself. Despite the warnings, I decided to reignite the OnlyFans account. I logged in and made another post, telling the subscribers that I had deceived them and still had plenty of photos to share. The engagement surged immediately, and I could almost feel the excitement of the subscribers through the screen. The money was good, and the thrill of the revenge kept me going. Donald wasn't the only one who warned me. Abigail and Mike both expressed their concerns, saying this could end badly. But I didn't listen. The subscribers kept coming, and I was making a decent amount of money from the account. Occasionally, some subscribers even found my address or Shelley's old address and showed up, I would tell them that the person responsible for posting the photos didn't live there and they would eventually leave. One evening I received a message from Shelley. She had finally left for Iowa and cursed me for everything I had done. She mentioned that she had contacted the police, but since the photos were taken willingly and she was an adult, there was little they could do. They issued a local warning to stay away from her, but the number of fans kept growing. They detained one, but more appeared, and over time the police lost interest in the case, which ultimately led to her departure. Undeterred, I continued to post. The next photo showed Shelley in another provocative pose, the chain from her collar held by a different man. The reactions were explosive. Comments poured in and the money kept flowing. Despite the chaos it caused, there was a strange sense of control and power that came with managing the account. Yet I knew I was walking a fine line. Every post, every new subscriber was a reminder of the delicate balance I maintained between revenge and responsibility. The warnings from Donald, Abigail, and Mike echoed in my mind, but I pushed them aside, driven by a need to reclaim my narrative and turn the tables on Shelley. As days turned into weeks, the OnlyFans account became a phenomenon. Shelley's departure to Iowa seemed to have little impact on the subscribers' enthusiasm. They craved more, and I was willing to provide it. Despite the moral ambiguity, the financial rewards and the sense of vindication fueled my determination. One afternoon I was walking near my house with Abigail. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over our quiet neighborhood. We chatted about mundane things, enjoying the simplicity of each other's company. Suddenly I noticed a scruffy-looking guy, clearly under the influence of something, loitering near my driveway. He turned around uneasily when he saw us approaching. As we got closer, I asked, "What's the matter here?" He looked at me with wild eyes and muttered, "Where is she?" I understood immediately who he was talking about. "She's no longer here, not even in this state. You've got the wrong place." The guy didn't seem convinced. "Me and my friends, we used to come by her house all the time, looking through her windows. She's just gorgeous. We'll find her." This alarmed Abigail, but I didn't pay much attention to his ramblings. The guy seemed too strung out on whatever substances he was using to distinguish reality from his delusions. I firmly told him to get off my property, threatening to call the police if he didn't leave. He grumbled something unintelligible but eventually staggered away. Time passed and I continued posting photos of Shelley every day. The thrill had worn off, but I was committed to seeing it through to the end. At the current pace, I estimated it would take about 3.5 months to post everything. Abigail and I started seeing each other literally every day. Despite her modest and quiet demeanor, she had a strong-willed side when it came to personal matters. I found her persistence both surprising and inspiring. It was something Shelley had lacked. Meanwhile, Shelley's parents contacted me, begging me to stop posting the photos. They warned me that continuing would bring nothing but grief. But since Shelley moved in with them, nothing significant had happened. Occasionally, some persistent fans showed up at my door, but I always stuck to the same story. I had no idea where Shelley lived. I explained to them that she had been my wife, she had cheated on me, we divorced, and she started this career on her own afterward. This explanation usually satisfied them and they would leave. After a while, I had posted almost all the photos. One day, Shelley's father called me, sounding both desperate and angry. He informed me that in Iowa, a handful of local fans had found Shelley. Eventually, the group was detained by the police, but the damage was done. He demanded that I stop the postings immediately. I realized that all the successful photos had been posted, and only the unsuccessful shots remained. The situation had spiraled out of control, and I knew it was time to put an end to it. I decided to visit Shelley in person to see how she was holding up. I told Abigail about my plan, and she agreed to come with me. I completed a design project I had been working on and received payment for it, giving me a sense of closure on that front. The next day, we set off for Iowa. After 4 hours of driving, we arrived at a small house similar to ours in a quiet neighborhood. The familiarity of the setting struck me, making me realize how much our lives had diverged since the divorce. We knocked on the door and Shelley's mother answered. She was obviously unhappy to see us, her eyes filled with spite. She refused to say anything and simply turned away, leaving the door open for us to enter. We stepped inside, the tension palpable. Shelley was sitting in the living room looking worn out and fragile. The confident, ambitious woman I once knew was gone. She looked up, her eyes widening with surprise and then narrowing with anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I explained that I wanted to see how she was doing after hearing about the incident with the fans. Abigail stood by my side, her presence a calming influence. Shelley scoffed, her bitterness evident. "You've done enough damage, Henry. Your revenge was successful. Now leave." Despite her harsh words, I felt a pang of guilt. I tried to apologize, but she cut me off. "I don't want your apologies. I just want to be left alone." Shelley's father entered the room, his face a mix of anger and resignation. He demanded that we leave immediately, not wanting to hear anything we had to say. I nodded, realizing there was nothing more I could do here. As we turned to leave, Abigail spoke up. "Shelley, if you ever need help, we're here for you. Despite everything, no one deserves what happened to you." Shelley looked at Abigail, her expression softening for a moment before hardening again. "Just go." We walked out of the house and back to the car, the weight of the visit heavy on our shoulders. We decided to stay in Iowa for a while. Abigail and I checked into a hotel near Shelley's new home. We wanted to monitor the situation and offer any help we could. Over the next few days, I stopped posting new photos, hoping to calm things down. However, another aggressive fan managed to track down Shelley and started pestering her. Frustrated and protective, I decided to handle the situation myself. I tracked down the fan, a scrawny guy with a crazed look in his eyes. When I confronted him, I made it clear that he needed to leave Shelley alone. I didn't hold back, telling him exactly what I thought of his behavior. He was scared enough to back off, muttering apologies as he scrambled away. Abigail, who had been watching from a distance, remarked that it was unlikely this incident would change the strained relationship with Shelley's parents. She was right, but I felt a sense of duty fulfilled. To ensure Shelley's safety, I paid for a few months of private security for her. They would monitor the house and prevent anyone suspicious from getting too close. After setting up the security detail, Abigail and I stayed a few more days to make sure everything was in place. When we were confident Shelley was safe, we returned to Illinois. Upon arriving home, we were met with an unpleasant surprise. While we were away, some fans, angry about the lack of new posts, had vandalized our house. Windows were broken and property was damaged. It was a shocking reminder of how obsessive and dangerous some people could be. The police were called, and they managed to catch those responsible. The incident left us both shaken. Meanwhile, Shelley's situation in Iowa seemed to stabilize. The security I had arranged for her did their job well, and the harassment from fans stopped, at least for now. It was a relief to know she was safe, even if our relationship remained strained and distant. Things are calm now with me and my ex, but God knows what could happen. I've been wondering lately if I did the right thing with this whole plan of revenge.